The new while function in FileMaker 18 is like a looping script, but inside a calculation formula. We've had this functionality since FileMaker 8 Advanced with custom function recursion. The problem with recursion is it's difficult to understand, especially with complex formulas. The while function should change this, so let me show you how. Let me show you why it's easier to use. I have quite a few examples. The first one is while versus recursion, which simply explodes whatever is in this company field and makes it into a multi-key for type ahead and things like that. So I'm going to show you how to do it with the while loop and explain how it works, and then show you the recursion. So we'll go into Manage Database, and you can see first of all there's the recursion version. It calls a custom function, which we'll take a look at later. If we look at the while version, we see that we have a function. Let's go ahead and come out here and type in while and put in the function here so we can see it. There are 4 variables: the initial variable, the condition, the logic, and the result. This is essentially the part that is repeated based on this condition while this condition is true. Here's where you declare variables, and here's where the result comes out. Now you'll notice some similarities to the let function. Let's put the let function in here as well. Let function doesn't have quite as much, but it does allow you to declare values and have a result. So it's very similar, and keep thinking that when you're using the while function. And of course, think of a looping script and recursion as well, because that'll help you to understand it. So what we do up here in this first section is declare everything we want to use later on. There are some exceptions, but it's better off just declaring every variable you want to use later. I personally use the @ sign to distinguish my variables from other values, but you can use whatever you want, it doesn't matter. So I declare the company field, the length of the company field, or @data, and we declare the result as blank. You'll get a lot of that blank declaration at the beginning because, again, you have to declare these values in order to use them later. And you'll see down here, I'm going to use it down here later, so I need it there. Here's my condition that determines whether this section right here should be looped. And notice that each one of these sections, or at least this section and this section, has brackets for multiple values or variables. So as long as the length is greater than or equal to 0, then we're going to keep on looping. Now the initial value is going to be the length of whatever company name is in there. But each time I loop, I'm going to subtract 1 right here. And on the result, I'm going to keep on compiling it together by making the result equal to itself plus or concatenated to, and we'll get to this in a second, that's a return to skip the extra return at the beginning. I want all these leftover returns. You can try taking this out and see what happens if you don't put it in there. But we put in this part right here which says grab the left values based on the length. Well, it's going to be the whole company, then -1 is going to be the whole company minus 1 character, and -2, -3, and keep on building it up in a return separated list, but not on the first time when it's empty. So it's only going to do it the first. It's actually, I should say that, so I got that backwards. You could do it first time. This is actually going to say don't do it the last time, so we don't get a return at the end. And then all you do is say take the @data and the @result. Now, I don't necessarily need @data here. I only need really @result. But I did that so that I wouldn't get that extra return. You can try just replacing this with the return and taking this part out, and you'll see what I mean, what happens with it. So hopefully that gives you a basic understanding. It's going to take a while to get used to this. But let's take a look at the recursion. We'll go into our Manage, Custom Functions, edit it, and you'll see it has 1 parameter. Just pass in the text, which will be the company name. And we say, and this looks a lot easier, and in a lot of ways it is. And so you're thinking, well, why is the while function easier to use? Well, because it has all those different sections that makes it easier to define everything. This is more complex in a way that you have to wrap your head around how it works. So you have to wrap your head around the fact that it goes ahead and calls itself. So what we're doing is we're saying, is the length greater than 1? Okay, then take the text, which was the company, concatenate a return, and then call itself again, -1. It's essentially the same idea as the while function. It's just built on a different concept. So In truth, it was actually easier for me to write this recursion, but I can see how once I get used to the while function, because I've been using recursion since FileMaker 8, once I get used to it, I'm going to probably find it easier to make it do what I want it to, because I have all those different sections. I can make each area organized and keep it right in my mind and help myself. So there's also some speed tests in here. So if you want to go ahead and try these out, you can enter the number of times it iterates and see what the speed is in seconds. I'm not going to do those right now, but they're there on the download file, so feel free to get them. Let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look at JSON. The reason I'm putting JSON up here is because everybody on the early test sites are saying, wow, this is really going to help me parse my JSON. While the while function wasn't introduced just to parse JSON, all these guys who use JSON a lot saying, hey, this is going to make our lives so much easier. So here's some basic JSON right in here. And you can see what it does with the function is it grabs this number, and this number, and adds them up. So if I change this to, let's say, 6,000, you'll see that it updates. And there's a recursion version here as well. It's pretty simple. We go into Manage Database. I'm not going to go over the recursion version, but I'll go over the while version. And you can see what it's doing is it's using the JSON get element, but then it's adding it. Each time it gets element 1, element 2, element 3, and adds to the total, and then it basically increases that value and totals it up. Let's go on to another example, because there's so many things you can do with the while function. Let's go into something I do a lot, which is formatting phone numbers. So in other words, when you come in here and you type in, we'll delete this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. As soon as I exit, it formats the way I want it. I've been doing this with recursion for ages. Now we can do it with the while function. So we go into Manage Database, take a look at it. There's the auto enter, and here's the whole formula. And did I get the right one here? Got to make sure I got the right one. I got the recursion one. So there's a recursion one. Here's the while version. And you can see it's quite a bit more complicated, but again, it's organized so it's easy. This stuff is pretty easy to declare up here. The logic's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So now you can go and do this without custom functions. Let's go in and take a look at another one. Let's take a look at this password. I like to generate random passwords with FileMaker, and what I did is I have a while and a scripted loop. Because remember, it's not just recursion that it acts like, it also acts like a scripted loop. Loop and whatever type of loop you might want to do. And so it can do a lot of the same things. So when you're thinking and looking at your tool belt and thinking, which tool am I going to pull out to do this? Well, now you have recursion, scripting loops, and while. And you can pick the one that best fits the scenario. Because sometimes it will be a script, sometimes it will be recursion, and sometimes it will be while. They all have different facets in how they work, and becoming familiar with them will help you to understand which tool to use in which job. So let's take a look at this. They're both scripts now. So I wasn't able to do it with, I could have done it without a script, but I didn't want to. So here's the loop, a basic loop that goes through and generates the password. Oops, so that's the speed test there, I apologize. It goes and uses this formula to generate that password. So you can see it's grabbing a random number of middle characters. So here's the random declaration. This is a random integer, a form you can find on the internet very easily. The number of characters, as you saw in that global field that was on there. All that stuff's in there, and it just simply grabs a character from those values, a middle character, based on a random location. Very simple, very straightforward. I did the same thing with the while loop. There's no loop required here. I just need to do it once and it'll do everything for me because all the logic is built into this section right here, and it keeps looping inside the formula. So even though I use it in a script, it doesn't require the actual loop script. And here's one more we can take a look at. We'll take a look at the email. Now, here's a big difference. I can do this one very easily, and it makes sense to do it with the calculation, with the while, but to do it with a script, I actually have to run the script. I mean, I guess I could put a script trigger on here whenever this is changed and have it rewrite this, but the fact that I can make it as a calculation field is a distinct advantage. So we'll come in here and go into Manage Database, and you'll see something quite complicated. I'm not going to go over this. You can look at it to your heart's desire, but basically go through and grab every single one of the emails that it finds inside that text, no matter how many there are. And the script will also do it as well. It works perfectly, and you can take some time on your own to go and examine these. Now, another function that comes along with this is set recursion. I believe I put that on my original. We'll come in here and say manage database. And do we put the set recursion on here? Well, let's just put it on here. It's pretty easy to do. Set recursion. And then I put a semicolon. And then I can put any number I want. I can say only recurse once. If I don't put set recursion on, it'll go 50,000 times before it times out. Now this is different because in FileMaker 17 and earlier, it was 10,000 if you weren't using tail recursion. But now the set recursion will work on while functions and recursive custom functions to set it to less or more than 50,000, depending on what you want. So you can come in here and put 100,000. And then that will allow that while function to go beyond its default value. So that's a pretty cool little function there to have if you do need to do that. Especially, I think people are going to more likely use it for less recursions because they want that timeout to happen earlier. Maybe they know what they're doing. They're working on a calculation, and they don't want it to time out. They just want it. They know they're only going to get, let's say, 10 iterations at the most. Why have it iterate 50,000 times when you're trying to debug this formula? So the while and the custom recursion, or the custom functions with recursion, and the set recursion go hand in hand. They're meant to go together. So while I'm not a JSON developer, I do recommend, if you do that, to take a look at the while function. But again, you can use a while function anywhere inside FileMaker. Anytime you need to go ahead and extract or do something over and over and over again, think of the while function, get used to it because it's going to be very powerful in the future.